Welcome, everyone. We're excited that you could join the Facebook Live event on gene therapy. Gene therapy has become an increasingly hot topic and a promising approach to treat genetic diseases. We will talk with medical experts today about how gene therapies can be used to treat certain rare diseases, followed by a Q&A. I'm Paul Wynn, a member of the patient advocacy team here at Ultragenyx. I have the pleasure of moderating the discussion, which came about from input from the rare disease community. They want to learn more about the potential of gene therapy, and they told us. This Facebook Live event is one way we are addressing questions and interests from the rare disease community. We welcome and encourage you to use the chat function, engage with our experts, and ask questions. We will get to as many questions as possible, and we will try to answer some afterwards as well. As a biopharmaceutical company, we have specific rules and industry regulations we must follow. So just a few housekeeping items. For instance, we can't engage or allow conversations about products or treatment on this page. We reserve the right to engage or allow conversations about products or treatments on this page. We reserve the right to delete any comments that violate our community guidelines, which contain comments or content that may include medical advice, personal health information, profanity or offensive language, mention brand name products, comments that are spam, or violates Facebook's terms of use. Please note, this event is being recorded and we will share the recording on our Facebook page and other social media channels as soon as possible so others can watch and share it. I'm really pleased to be joined by an incredible panel of experts. Dr. Eric Crombez is the Chief Medical Officer of Gene Therapy and Inborn Errors in Metabolism at Ultragenyx, a biopharmaceutical company dedicated to developing new treatments, including gene therapies, for patients with rare and ultra-rare diseases. Dr. Carrie Harding is Professor of Molecular and Medical Genetics at the Oregon Health and Science University School of Medicine. And finally, Dr. Jeff Bronstein is Professor of Neurology and Director of Movement Disorders at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. Welcome to our panelists. Dr. Crombez, let's start with you. Could you tell us what is gene therapy?
Great, thanks, Paul, and certainly foundational to what we're here to talk about today. While I've spent my career really focused on patients with rare diseases and working on our gene therapy programs for the past 8 years, I do understand and appreciate for a lot of people this is a very new idea, a very new way of approaching treatments for these rare diseases. So, at its core, gene therapy is a treatment approach that intends to provide fully functioning copies of a gene that isn't working correctly in patients. The goal is to deliver a gene that instructs a cell to produce a missing protein or enzyme. Today, we're going to focus on 3 of these rare diseases for which we're developing gene therapies: GSD1A, or glycogen storage disorder, OTC, a urea cycle defect, and Wilson disease. These are all liver-directed gene therapies, so we're trying to target the hepatocytes or liver cells here, and this is where these enzymes are meant to function. We're focused on a type of gene therapy called AAV gene therapy. AAV stands for adeno-associated virus. So what we're doing is taking the native form of that virus, we take away its ability to replicate. So when patients are dosed with gene therapy, these viruses that have been turned into vectors, they no longer have the ability to replicate. We then take a normal functioning copy of the gene, which we call a transgene, and sometimes there are slight modifications to those genes. We add the transgene to the vector, we infuse it through a peripheral administration. The gene therapy travels to the liver cells, it's taken up by those cells and starts to produce normal protein or enzymes. Currently, gene therapies are available for and under development for patients with serious and life-threatening diseases because they focus on correcting the true underlying cause of this disease. A lot of these diseases don't have treatment. A lot of these diseases that do have some form of treatment, they're really working on signs and symptoms and not really correcting the underlying biochemical cause of this disease. If successful, these gene therapies have the potential to offer a better chance for long-term improvements for patients with a single dose. Certainly, there are challenges, and we can talk about them more as we go through and with the Q&A. And we do always want to be benefit that all treatments come with benefits and risks. One of the key challenges with everyone working in gene therapy is the ability to have consistent and reliable manufacturing. To help achieve this for our programs, we're developing our own manufacturing platform, and we're actually underway in building a new manufacturing facility in the greater Boston area that we plan to have open next year.
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Crumbez. If you're just tuning in, we are so glad you joined us and are participating. Again, we remind you to use the chat function, ask questions. We will get to them shortly. For now, let's turn to Dr. Harding. Dr. Harding, could you explain how gene therapy actually works in the body?
So in this case, since we're using the adeno-associated virus, normally this virus would go into our body and infect us, and doesn't give any, this is a unique virus in that it doesn't cause any symptoms. It doesn't really cause any disease in us, but we've sort of hijacked its normal life cycle, and we've added a therapeutic gene to it, and it's going to travel through the bloodstream. We administer it through the intravenous infusion, and it goes to the liver and goes into the liver cells. And normally, as Dr. Crumbez mentioned, the virus would be able to replicate and spread. We've eliminated its ability to do that. It just goes in and infects the liver cells and delivers its cargo, and begins to produce the therapeutic protein that we've asked it to start producing.
Right. Thanks, Dr. Harding. Dr. Bronstein, what should an individual know if they're considering participating in a gene therapy study?
Sure, thanks. Well, like any clinical trial, you really want to have a good understanding of what the potential benefits are and what the risks are. And by definition, these are experimental, so there are going to be some risks involved. But it's important to remember that there's been over 4,000 trials with gene therapy that either have been completed or underway. So we've already learned quite a bit about it. But it's really essential to work with the investigator, go through the consent form, and really learn about what are the potential benefits and what are the risks. The goal of the study is to hopefully help the disease, and we're hoping that it's going to have long-term benefits.
Thank you. Dr. Crumbez, you mentioned earlier three programs that we're focused on. Could you go into a little bit more detail about the GSD1A, the OTC, and Wilson disease programs?
Yeah, no, thank you. And again, these are our lead gene therapy programs. We began working really with these inborn errors of metabolism, really focused on diseases that can be corrected with focus on the liver. We have since expanded that work to include some gene therapy programs in the neurologic space as well as muscle. But our most gene therapy programs that are furthest along the development are focused on these three. So GSD1A, or glycogen storage disorder type 1, is our lead gene therapy program. We're very well underway with our phase 3 trial there. So that went through a traditional phase 1/2 study, or traditional for rare disease, where we established initial safety and selected a dose to bring forward into phase 3. And then with this pivotal trial, this trial that we'll use to produce the data for registration with the FDA and other agencies around the world, is rapidly progressing through enrollment, and hope to have really good results to share in the relatively near future. Our next program is OTC, ornithine transcarbamylase. That is one type of urea cycle defect, so really meant to metabolize ammonia, which is a very potent neurotoxin, so we really can't tolerate levels of ammonia above the upper limit of normal. That study is also in a traditional phase 3 trial. went through its phase 1/2, very similar to GSD1A, where we established initial safety and selected our dose for further evaluation. That study is earlier on in phase 3 development, but again, really exciting. We're looking to enroll patients around the world, very much expanding the regions we're looking at compared to our phase 1/2 studies. And again, looking forward to have great results to share in the near future. Wilson disease is our next program. That study is a little bit different and interesting because we're looking to evaluate that gene therapy program in a single study to registration. So we'll move through those traditional phases of development, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, in a single seamless study. That's important because the best way to bring these gene therapies and any new treatment available to patients is to work through development as safely, efficiently as possible, generate that data, and then make it available widely to patients. Wilson disease is a disorder of copper metabolism. Normally, the liver is supposed to either place copper onto something called ceruloplasmin for trafficking around the body. Copper is important for certain functions of the body, but it needs to be transported on ceruloplasmin. And otherwise, the liver is meant to excrete copper through the bile outside of the body. If it's not able to do those things, free copper leaks out of the liver and can be very damaging to the body and the neurologic system. So again, like all of these diseases, looking to replace that gene that's not working correctly with the transgene, start producing normal enzymes, normal protein, really establish normal biochemical metabolic pathways for these diseases, and really truly get to the heart of these diseases.
Thank you for that overview. Dr. Bronstein, you touched on this earlier, but could you just elaborate on what the hope that we hope to achieve through these 3 studies and other gene therapy studies?
Yeah, the hope is that it's going to help replace that protein in, say, for Wilson's disease, the one I'm most familiar with, and help deal with the copper in a much more normal way so that the liver can then manage that copper so that it isn't causing toxicity. So the hope is that through one single dose, they'll have long-term improvement in the copper and hopefully prevent the need for taking medications and altering the diet.
Thank you. I'm sure some of the people that have tuned in may have questions about how to learn more about these studies. Dr. Crumbes, how can they find out more about these 3 programs?
Yeah, certainly there are a lot of ways to find out more about these specific clinical trials and clinical trials in general. I would say, and I would recommend, the first place to go to is your treating physician or treating physicians. Even if they're not familiar with Ultragenyx or these specific trials, you know, there are resources available to them, and I think it's best to have that conversation with your treating physicians. Certainly, there's a lot of information on clinicaltrials.gov, and that's a listing for all active clinical trials. And then also at Ultragenyx, we have information available on our websites, and specifically a website called ultrarareadvocacy.com. So again, certainly lots of ways to find out more information about these studies and clinical trial development in general.
Thank you. And we will put some of that information in the chat so people can see the websites to check out. Thank you, gentlemen, for the great discussion. We're going to switch over to the Q&A and get people a chance to put their questions in the chat so we can have a little bit of dialogue with the rare disease community. We'll be monitoring all questions, and we hope to get to as many as possible. I know that we're already responding to a few of them as we have this discussion. It is being recorded, so you'll be able to pass this on to your friends and colleagues and family members if they want to listen to this Facebook Live event. To get started, we often hear the question about how is gene therapy administered? So why don't we turn that over to Dr. Bronstein to elaborate more on the administration of gene therapies.
No, thanks. It's actually quite anticlimactic when you actually deliver it because simply you're sitting in a chair, they attach an IV, an intravenous line to a peripheral line, just like any other IV, and it's one dose infused, say in the Wilson's trial, about 2 hours, and you just sit there, and that's how it's administered. It's quite straightforward, and again, you're expecting this bells and whistles, but it's just a simple IV infusion that occurs once.
And then what happens after that one shot administration, Dr. Bronstein? What kind of monitoring is involved?
So we do a lot of monitoring. Obviously, safety is always number one, so we're monitoring any. So we worry that the body may cause an immune reaction. In other words, try to attack that. So we monitor for that. We monitor liver enzymes, which are very, very sensitive. We measure copper metabolism, obviously, and people continue their medications, but we monitor them very closely. Obviously, more in the immediate response. We have people coming in, we have blood tests, and constantly keeping very close track on how people are doing.
Dr. Bronstein, is the monitoring always done in person, or is there also virtual or telehealth options?
Yeah, that's what's really nice about modern technology. We can do many of these things through telehealth to really make this as impose as little inconvenience to people as possible while still keeping really high safety standards.
Thank you. Dr. Harding, why don't we turn over to you? Another common question we often hear is about the safety of gene therapy. What can you tell us about the overall, safety record of gene therapies?
So there have been several AAV trials that have been accomplished over the last, I think, even up to 15 years now in several different diseases. And overall, the safety record has been very good. Again, we do have to monitor for, there are some immune responses that we have to watch for, and we've learned how to treat some of these responses. They don't happen in everyone, but overall, I think the safety profile has been quite good in most trials. There are some dose-related issues at some of the trials, not the ones that we're talking about here, but other indications at very high doses of AAV. There's some other significant side effects that that we have to worry about. But again, at the doses that we're talking about in these trials have generally been pretty well tolerated.
And as Dr. Bronstein mentioned, that's the purpose of the ongoing monitoring, right? To monitor for those potential side effects.
Absolutely.
Right.
And so
Okay,
that, for the first year or so, that the monitoring is relatively frequent, and then this is in the clinical trial space, and then decreases over time.
Dr. Crombez, you gave a great overview of the 3 programs late stage at our company. Can you just sort of recap exactly where each of them are in their staging and what phase they are? Maybe start with the Wilson disease program.
Yeah, so technically all 3 of these programs we've talked about today are in pivotal trials, and that's kind of why I was using the terminology of traditional phase 3 trials for GSD1A and OTC, because we did do a single phase 1/2 study, and now we're in a phase 3 study that is meant to generate that data set that we'll submit to the FDA and other regulatory agencies for approval. The Wilson study, we're doing something a little bit different, and certainly something the FDA has really been encouraging and speaking quite a bit about, particularly in the context of gene therapy, is single studies to registration. That means we combine phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, all into a single study, so we move through those stages of development as quickly as possible. So by definition, because it's a single study, it's a pivotal trial, but we will still do the early part of drug development, really making sure we understand safety, making sure we have the right dose before we move into the stage where you study a larger number of patients, make sure that safety is confirmed, and then again generate that efficacy data we need to have further conversations with regulatory agencies.
Okay. And then what's the status, the OTC, GSD1A programs, that they're both in pivotal studies as well, is that right?
Yeah, so GSD1A is very far along in enrollment for that phase 3 study. Again, that is our lead program. OTC has started that phase 3 study. It is earlier on, but again, we always look to enroll these clinical trials as quickly as possible. So for both GSD1A and OTC, we have multiple sites across the U.S. The active sites are listed on clinicaltrial.gov, but there are opportunities to participate in these pivotal trials available today. Same thing for Wilson. That study is open and recruiting. We have sites active. We try to have good geographic coverage across the U.S. We do understand it's difficult to travel. It's been increasingly difficult for the past few years with the pandemic. As Dr. Bronstein mentioned, we do try to make this as user-friendly, if you will, for the patients as well, and we have a lot of travel support, home visits, and doing everything we can to make this something that patients can do and still continue on with school or work or what they need to do in their day-to-day lives.
So there's, if a patient lives outside of a city that doesn't have a clinical trial site, is there some sort of travel assistance that they can use to participate?
There is, and it's pretty robust at this point. Again, we've been working on these programs from the beginning for over 8 years now, and we've had that travel system in place. So I hope to say, and I think fair to say, we've worked out some of the kinks all along the way there, and certainly Dr. Bronstein and Hardy can comment, but the goal is to make that as easy as possible for patients. We appreciate the effort it takes, that patients are helping us bring these drugs forward so all patients can benefit. And we do realize there is a very big burden on these patients and their families to support going through this.
Thank you. Dr. Harding, obviously one of the first steps if someone is interested in gene therapy is to talk to their doctor. What kind of questions should they be bringing up with their doctor to determine if this is right for them?
Well, I think the most important thing to really consider, obviously, is these are experimental therapies, and we still are in the process of determining that they're safe and that there's potential benefit, and so the patient needs to have that discussion with their practitioner that that they themselves want to participate in an experimental trial. They shouldn't really be at this point considering it a approved treatment alternative to what they're currently on standard of their current treatment. So they need to keep the potential balance of safety versus potential benefits in mind, and I think that's the discussion they need to have with their practitioner to decide whether they want to participate or not.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. I see there's some questions in the chat about specific disease areas and whether they have gene therapies ongoing or clinical trials. Dr. Bronstein, what is the best place for people to find out if there's a gene therapy program in their specific disease area?
Yeah, I find clinicaltrials.gov to be one of the most best resources for finding trials, and you can put keywords and locations, disease types. So I would find as a central place clinicaltrials.gov for all gene therapies. We're all registered in that.
Okay. And is there any other sites like does the American Gene Cell Therapy Association, do they also have good resources and trial finders?
Oh, of course. As you just mentioned, there's Also, a lot of groups, a lot of the nonprofits, for example, there's information for Wilson's disease, the Wilson's Disease Association, and a variety of nonprofits as well. So for your disease, that may be one of the advocacy groups, maybe one of the best resources to know what type of trials are available, not just gene therapy, but other trials. So you really know what your options are, which is really important. This is always voluntary, so you really want to get as much information as possible before entering into the trial.
Right. And just to clarify, it's the American Society of Gene and Cell Therapy. ASGCT.org is a great resource and website for more information about gene therapies in general. Yeah. All right. Dr. Crombez, any closing thoughts as we come to the end of the event?
No, I just would say thank you. I appreciate the time. This is new for us at Ultragenics, so I think it's a great opportunity to have these type of discussions, to do it and reach a larger audience. Certainly, a lot of follow-up conversation can be had, and again, we talked about the various resources, but again, we appreciate that we're in a partnership. We're in a partnership with the agencies. We're in a partnership with our sites and these physicians like Dr. Harding, Dr. Bronstein, and most importantly, this is a partnership with patients and patient advocacy groups. So again, just really appreciate and thankful for all the great work that everyone's doing together.
Well said. Thank you, Dr. Crombez. And thank you to Dr. Harding and Bronstein for your time and answering all the questions and providing more details and information about gene therapy and the potential for different disease areas and trials that are available. And thank you to those who participated. We appreciate your engagement. We hope you found this informative and helpful. For anyone who has questions that didn't get any answers, please reach out to us. There are several ways you can reach us at trialrecruitment@ultragenics.com, or for general questions, the patient advocacy team is here to help you as well. Send a note to patientadvocacy@ultragenics.com. A huge thank you to everyone who participated today, and we will let you know when this recording is available to share with your communities and families and friends. Thank you, and everyone have a great day.